Welcome, everybody, to the April 2026 edition of Solar Currents. My name is Robert Bassetti. I'm a professional astrologer and Grand Pendragon for the Ancient Order of Druids in America. This is a free service put on by AODA, and if you would like some more information about how to join the order, please go to www.aoda.org. When we're talking about the planets and how they operate within the chart, there are a few kind of subdivisions of how they operate. First, we have the luminaries. That is the sun and the moon. The sun represents our purpose and how we approach the day-to-day life. It has to do with our ego. Then we have the moon. That is our inner light. That is that's our subconscious. It's our dream world. It's our emotions. It's really how we process the telluric and the solar currents into the lunar currents and then express them out into the world. Our personal planets, Mercury, which is about communication, how we learn. Venus, it's our aesthetic. It's how we connect to things. It's what we're attracted to. It's how we love. It's how we receive love. And Mars is more of the carnal, primal aspect of ourselves. It's our vitality, but it's also, kind of how we fight and how we fawn. Then we get into the social planets. The social planets are Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter is really about how it has to do with a lot about long-term wisdom, how we expand through life, how we expand in the world. And Saturn is more about our restrictions. It can also have to do with our complexes. It's kind of how we view responsibility. And then we get to the transpersonal planets. The transpersonal planets are the planets that really affect the collective. Now, they do have an important part in our natal charts, but they move so slowly that we call them the generational planets. We share these planets with kind of everybody in the area that we are born in. From a time standpoint. Now we have Uranus, which is kind of our journey of authenticity. It can be how we individuate within the world and within the collective. We have Neptune. Neptune is our enchantment, but it can also be our delusions. It is kind of the pre-verbal sense of our spirituality. It is how we connect to the collective consciousness. And then we have Pluto. Pluto is our sense of rebirth. And really before rebirth has to come death. It can be very intense. It's where we, kind of have power issues in life, whether we're the one giving the power or receiving the power. So these are all important to understand. So, for the past, since 2024, we've been in this period of the mini grand trine between the outer planets. And, it's been this kind of lockbox that has been, twisting and turning, and this button's been pushing. Planets have gone retrograde. Planets were out of sign, which means they weren't able to, their energy wasn't able to express themselves in the best way possible. And this is happening between Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus. Now, Neptune is the focal point of this, and it is in Aries. Pluto is in Aquarius, and Aquarius is really about humanism, technology, futurism. It's the big, lofty view from above. And then we have Uranus, which is really about drastic changes. It's about kind of the lightning strike events that happen to really bring us to our authenticity. And when they're, right now, Pluto's in Aquarius. We have Neptune in Aries, and Uranus this month on the 26th of April is about to finally move into Gemini. What that is going to do is bring all of those energies into a very simpatico situation. Um, Uranus doesn't really operate well in Taurus. Taurus is slow. It doesn't like to move. In Gemini, which is much, it's mutable air. It's, kind of almost the ultimate expression of freedom in some ways. Uranus loves that because there's ample opportunity for it to strike. And that is a compatible energy with obviously the other air sign, which is Pluto, where it forms a trine, and then the other masculine energy, which is fire in Neptune. So what's happening is all of those lockbox pieces have finally kind of, come together. Every button has been pressed. And on the 26th, we're going to really start to see the full manifestation of what this mini grand trine is. And these trans planets will continue this alliance all the way through 2028. Some people say until 2030. Um, you know, and it's going to be continuing to cast profound change within the collective. And that's for everybody in the world. Pluto in Aquarius really demands a rebirth in technology, humanism, and the empowerment of the archetypal rebel. We're seeing that right now for sure. Neptune in Aries cloaks the collective unconscious and the collective consciousness in a fog of intuition and urgency, blending spiritual authority and the weight of tradition through its conjunction with Saturn. We just saw that Saturn Neptune conjunction, and now Saturn is starting to pull away. Now, and that Uranus the Awakener is going to be moving into Gemini on the 26th. It's striking our shared networks of communication. It's striking our how we exchange knowledge and the very fabric of the written word. We can see many themes being, touched with this mini grand trine, and it is going to continue to do so for quite some time. So where are we at in the wheel of the year? Well, we are, really in the middle of Aries season right now. We've hit the spring equinox point, and now we are moving towards the first fire festival. And that is how the wheel of the year fits in to the 12 signs of the zodiac. The very center of the fixed sign is where our fire festivals are at. And that's why you see some people talk about, oh, well, this is traditional Beltane versus astrological Beltane. Astrological Beltane, Lunasa, Samhain, and Imbolc will always fall on the 15-degree point of the fixed sign of that season. We are in the spring quadrant, Aries, Taurus, and Gemini. The summer quadrant is Cancer, Leo, and Virgo. The autumnal quadrant is Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius. And then our winter quadrant is Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. So we just had our full moon in Libra. It's very easy to think about Libra as just being about relationships. And this one has a little bit more flavor to it. It's a spotlight on the relationships, especially those that we consider family, both chosen and inherited. Now, we tend to use the buzzwords in astrology like, community, collective, family. I mean, the term family is going to mean different things for different people. If you are somebody with, who is a single person, and you're running a business with a partner, that partner could be your family. And why are we bringing the concept of family into this? Well, it's because we have this what's called a T square to Jupiter in Cancer. So we can see the sun at 12 degrees 21 minutes in Aries, and we can see the moon at 12 degrees 21 Libra. So what is happening is the Earth is right now is between the sun and the moon. And the sun is shining its light on the moon, which is reflecting it back to us. Now, there is a planet, that Jupiter in Cancer, which is at the midpoint between those two. And that really causes attention. If you look at that triangle, it really looks like a bow being pulled back and strung. And that is really the concept of the T square. It is a tension that feels like it needs to be released. So family dynamics, who or what we let into our cosmic egg. The cosmic egg is really a big part of understanding how Cancer as a sign operates. It's that shell that we put around ourselves, and we let certain people in and we keep certain people out. People who are usually inside the egg, get the kind of soft, squishy interior, very loving, very nurturing. But if you're outside of that, or you're somebody who has, considered betraying of our tribe or not in our tribe, we can be a little bit more cold. So when we're talking about that dynamic of a T square there, we're really seeing that evaluation. Are you on the inside or are you on the outside? And Jupiter as a planet really doesn't have a hugely negative context, even within what would be considered a hard aspect, because Jupiter is the great benefic. It brings luck, it brings expansion, it brings wisdom. So, anytime that we see a Jupiter square moon, it's really just going to be about big emotions. And that could be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. And that's one thing to understand about everything that we're going to talk about tonight, is that these archetypes and the way that they operate have a multivalent way that they can, function. And that function is often determined by the nurturing that we have within the situation. So it's not that in my opinion at least, that it wouldn't be Claudius Ptolemy's either, that we're totally fated within the stars. There is also a nurture aspect into how these ideas and these celestial solar currents are going to manifest within our lives. And our moon is the one that processes that. So you might be fueled to push to evaluate whether the relationships that we have are really harmonious and they're working, or they just appear that way. So, when we're looking at a full moon, it's also important to really dig into some of the depth of the information. This is why kind of like meme astrology and the Facebook posts can kind of be a little bit off because they're not really looking at the full and deep picture. So who is the ruler of Libra? Well, the moon is in Libra, so that's going to be important. Well, the ruler of Libra is Venus. We talked last month about the concept of domicile. Well, where's Venus? Well, we see Venus over here in Taurus. That is the other sign that it rules. That means that this is going to be a very comfortable energy. It is going to be receiving that energy very well, just as the moon is the ruler of that Jupiter in Cancer. It is going to be very quick to receive that energy. This is going to be a very active energy that we have in this full moon that will descend over the course of the month as we approach the Aries new moon. So again, the ruler of the Libra full moon is Venus. Venus is in Taurus. Taurus is exalted by the moon and ruled by Venus. But we have that Venus square Pluto there. That is really going to make us question whether the connections and the relationships that we have are going to be able to survive the collective changes that are going to be occurring. So this is just going to be the theme. This is a good starting point for what's going to be happening over the course of the month. Because last month we talked a lot about Pisces and how Pisces worked just as a sign because there was so much happening. Well, this month it's Aries' turn. And the sun is in Aries, obviously, in a full moon. And it's going to continue taking that idea of evaluating what are the connections and the relationships that we're keeping. Are they a complete picture? It's not just about the Libran qualities of kind of harmony and relationship and justice. It also enters into the fray through the rulership in Taurus, those ideas of, is it long lasting? Does it bring me sensual pleasure? Is it, is it comfortable? And that will be the theme. And then we are really going to understand that Pluto kicker there with that square to Venus saying, hey, are these relationships that you have going to be able to go the distance through all of this heavy collective change that is manifesting in the collective right now? So then we get into and that energy is really going to be setting the story, like I said, for the Aries stellium. Now, we talk about the word stellium a lot in astrology, and sometimes it's misused. People are very curious when they have a lot of planets in one sign in a chart. Really, what it means is when there's 3 or more planets, some will say 4 or more, and it really saturates the chart with that sign's core energy and instincts across multiple areas. So what we see when we see a stellium just in the transits or the mundane is the world tends to cluster around those ideas. Well, we're at war, okay? And this is a time where everybody in the world is affected by this. What's happening, especially within the Strait of Hormuz, it makes sense. The collective mood kind of takes on the sign's qualities and feels its drives, its fears, and its preoccupations simultaneously. Crisis or breakthroughs in that sign's domain happen suddenly, with unusual speed and intensity. So the sign's shadow side can surface on a mass scale. And when we're talking about Aries, we're talking about war. Um, and that could be like propaganda under Gemini, financial collapse under Capricorn. It's all going to do with what the sign that the stellium is happening is occurring. So once the planets start to disperse, though, that's while the energy tends to kind of dissipate rather quickly, there does tend to be a lasting effect. And you can see we have Mercury, Neptune, Mars, the moon, Saturn, the sun, and Chiron all really moving and transiting through Aries this month, with its most powerful between the 16th and the 20th of this month. So what is the energy of Aries and what is the story that we're happening? There are three cards here to take a look at. And these are three archetypal manifestations of how Aries can really work. We see first as the warrior. That is the traditional archetype that we have for Aries, the ram. Um, the warrior is the first crocus that comes out of the ground and blooms. There is that energy of initiation. But that energy of initiation can be very wild. But notice that the warrior holds the sword and the shield. It's quick to offense, but it can also be quick to defense, and that's really the key about managing this sub archetype here of the warrior. Is we don't want to just be flailing around. We want to make sure that we're doing things for the right reasons, and while we may be courageous, we want that courageous to be backed up through honor. And then the next evolution of the Aries archetype is that of the daredevil. The daredevil loves to be seen. This takes it to the next level. And the daredevil can be very inspiring to people. That risk taker, that is the pioneer that sets off. We see the birch trees here, as a pioneer tree. It's one of the first trees that comes after the destruction of a forest. It's often equated to the bard. And again, there is a lot of risk and there is a lot of danger being in the daredevil, but at the same time, they can be very inspiring. And then we finally, in its biggest, manifestation, in with a Jupiter influence, we see it as the explorer. We've now gone past kind of impulsive, and we've now gone, past needing to be seen, and we've gone into the area where we can explore and bring greatness and new information and new ideas, and be the initiator, versus the initiated. So the explorer really, and again, there is a lot of danger that can come into play when we're talking about the explorer with Aries. I mean, it's dangerous, but it's also greatly rewarding. So when we're talking about Aries energy, it's not just, there is that flavor of danger, but it can also be somebody who defends. It can be somebody who inspires, and it can be the explorer who's breaking new grounds. So again, the multivalent nature of all of these signs is present. It's really what we do to them. Now, we do have this really story of Aries coming up through the month. First we see Mars enter Aries itself. Now, Mars is in domicile in Aries. It loves being Aries. Think about your vital energy. This is, we feel empowered. We have drive. Think of it as lighting a furnace within ourselves. It doesn't yet really have a manifestation. It's just a sense of energy, and we should really take advantage of that. Now, then we get, we have a little bit of time where that furnace is just kind of, uh, churning and flaming and gaining heat. And then we have Mercury entering the fray on the 15th. Now, Mercury in Aries is quite a different subject than Mars entering into Aries. Mercury tends to speak before it. Mercury in Aries tends to think before it speaks. It tends to speak off of impulse. Tends to think off of impulse, and this can be dangerous. So, when we have that kind of inner churning that is happening with that Mars, and then Mercury enters the fray, we just want to make sure that we're not really, lobbing any bombs in our communication or how we're communicating with others. And then we get to the Sun conjunct Chiron the next day. And this is really becomes an awareness of where our identity, which is what Chiron in Aries is about, Chiron being the wounded healer. It is a wound that we tend to carry with us through life. And where it is the healer is through that wound, we've gained coping mechanisms, we've gained wisdom that we're able to share with others and heal others that are going through the same thing. So when we're talking about Chiron Aries, we're talking really about a wound of identity. So, the key words for Aries really are I am. Well, Chiron in Aries is more like I am, but am I allowed to be? Is that okay? That's not a very, good Aries energy that we want to express. We really want to be confident when we're in that Aries energy. So we have this inner churning and that vitality from the Mars. We're ready to speak, but then, we tend to be a little more reserved. Should I be as explosive as I am? And keeping in mind that this really starts with that concept of the full moon of evaluating our relationships. And remember where we left off last month. I mean, when the sun entered at the spring equinox into Aries, it immediately met the conjunction between Neptune and Saturn. So it's like these two giant Goliaths, they're on the battlefield. And your job is not to defeat them. Our job is you can't. It's an immovable object, meaning an unstoppable force. Our job is just to really declare our sovereignty while those forces are really having it out with each other. Then we evaluate our relationships. We feel that kind of call to courage for our own independence. The mind and the tongue are now without restraint, but then we get to this point of Sun conjunct Chiron, and there may be a little bit of questioning. Well, the new moon comes in and gives us a mission. This is an initiation into our sovereignty. This is an initiation into our independence in the new moon. We've confronted those concepts of identity and self-worth. Do I deserve to exist? Do I deserve to have a voice? Do I deserve? Well, the answer is yes, and the new moon's going to give you the mission. And then we finally, 2 days later, get to the Mars conjunct Saturn. And that is where that that furnace energy and that Mercury energy, it really kind of gets the discipline that it needs. Saturn really doesn't like being in Aries very much. Aries is impulsive and Saturn likes restriction. So this really is kind of like the general that is commanding the warrior in many ways. But you could see why it could be a very good thing for what's happened over the course of the month. We're all going to have this kind of emotional, internal energy that is building and building based off of having to deal with the things that are happening in the collective and evaluating the relationships and the close relationships that we have, especially within the family. And now we're just kind of churning this idea of independence and power and sovereignty. And that just keeps going and going. And then luckily, astrology just, the stars keep moving. We move into the ingress of the sun into Taurus. So finally, that Mercury, Mars, Saturn conjunction that happens on the 20th is also accompanied by the sun moving into Taurus. So this is a sharp, disciplined mind that thinks carefully before acting or speaking. But when it does strike, it is going to do it with precision and it is going to do it with force. But at the same time, the sun is now telling us, okay, it's time to chill. And, Taurus does that on the 20th of April. And I looked in to see if there was any, this is just an aside, what, does the 420 have anything to do with Taurus and the cannabis culture? Because sitting on the couch eating some things that you like is very Taurus. Did it start there? Well, no. It is just another reflection of astrology within the collective consciousness. It was actually started by a group called the Waldos out in California, um, who just decided that 420 in the afternoon was a good time to light up. So just as a cultural aside and an interesting facet of how these signs do really affect the collective consciousness and how there's all of these interesting synchronicities that we see throughout our cultural iterations and how the stars move in the sky. And then finally, at the end of the month, we have Venus and Uranus meeting in Gemini. And this is really, the energy centers on exploration and inspiration. Venus in Gemini is very much Awen energy. It's that flash of idea. It's that flash of thought. It is a moment of inspiration. And Venus really wants to make our connections about seeking that. This is going to be a great time to cultivate Awen within our own lives. We've gone to that, it's kind of we've gone from air to fire and then back to air. We were evaluating our relationships, we're evaluating our family life, we're evaluating if the relationships that we have are serving us and will be able to outlast what's happening and the changes in the collective. We then really get this spark in the furnace of Aries that really is about us getting our independence and our sovereignty. And it's going to be a struggle about that. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to do, with how we relate in our, just in our family life, but think of yourself as the warrior facing those two giants that are Neptune and Saturn and having to really declare your own sovereignty while you're being pushed and pulled in so many different directions. I think that's going to be more of the theme. Um, so we're also going to be seeking values that feel fresh, surprising, intellectually alive, and where freedom and discovery and our sense of authenticity leads the way. Because as soon as we have that that kind of sense of sovereignty, we've been the warrior, we've been the daredevil, we've been the explorer, and now we're trying, we're trying to see what else is out there in the world. And the end of the month is really going to be a good time for that sense of exploration. So, what is the celestial story of April 2026? So, at the spring equinox, we were asked to be the warrior. We were standing our ground as the battle between Saturn and Neptune vie for our attention. And again, the work is not to engage in battle with these titanic forces. It's not something that we can win, but to remain rooted in sovereignty, steady within ourselves, and then, just not allowing ourselves to be pulled into the illusions and the delusions of the collective consciousness that really want our attention. And then we turn the spotlight towards our allies, both chosen and inherited. Remember, people have many very different concepts of families and relationships. We're asked to examine whether harmony is genuine or simply just something we're maintaining right now. And we reflect on our own balance, our reciprocity, and our emotional truth. Can these relationships survive the collective changes? And then we get into that Aries period. A spark ignites as Mars and Mercury move through Aries, awakening the bold, unfiltered drive towards independence. So we have this action, and it becomes immediate and instinctive. We're saying what is on our mind. We're not scared of it. And then the sun's conjunction with Chiron reveals where our identity may have been wounded or restrained, bringing us to that question that we asked. I am, but am I allowed to be? This moment calls for us to be honest with ourselves and have the courage to reclaim this permission and be the decider. And from this awareness, our initiation with the new moon begins. The new moon in Aries marks the threshold into our own sense of sovereignty, of reclamation of self rooted in your own ideas rather than a sense of getting approval. And as Mars meets Saturn, that energy tends to be more refined. It is disciplined. It creates strength through commitment. And that Mercury, Mars, and Saturn alignment really sharpens the mind, encouraging thoughtful action and precise expression. What begins as that spark that lit the furnace of Mars entering into Aries becomes more self-defined by our own willingness to stand in our own authority. So after this intensity of fire and this kind of burning of the churning air, the sun enters Taurus, and it invites us to slow down and become embodied. Here, our sovereignty is really no longer just an idea, but now we put it into practice, and it's something we build slowly over time, and we stabilize it. We're asked to ground into the body and into the sacred earth and into those things that sustain us. So this is where that insight really starts to take root of who we want to be, where we cultivate security, nourishment, and our own sense of lasting value. So from this place of grounding, we begin to reach outward again when we have that Venus and that Uranus moving into Gemini. Curiosity returns, all right, this time, and it has intention. Exploration occurs, open into the realms of love, ideas, and values, and our connections bring flashes of inspiration and awen that push us beyond our old patterns of where we felt like we were not good enough. We're drawn towards what feels fresh, alive, and mentally expansive, and seeking relationships and values that are guided by freedom, discovery, and authenticity. That is the overall arching story of the astrology of this month. So I put together, if you'd like to write some of this down, or you can write it down from the video that I'm going to post later, of what's happening over the course of the month and when. It's good to keep some kind of journal of how this happens, especially when we're talking about kind of like Aries energy, where we're doing a lot of evaluation of the self. It's a good time. I did not put this in chart form because we have a lot of new astrologers here, and I wanted to make sure it was something that people could understand. So last month we talked about the ruler of the ascendant and what that meant and how it could represent itself in our lives through the houses. This month we're going to talk about a different thing that is again just a very easy, simple thing that we can look at in our own charts. So this would be a good time to pull out your charts if you have them available. So this is the cycle of the moon. It can be very confusing, especially the terminology, but there are really two basic things that you need to think about when you want to orient yourself with the phases of the moon. The first one is that if it's near the new moon, it's a crescent. If it's near a full moon, it's a gibbous. That's an easy one. Okay. And then whether it's waxing or whether it's waning. Okay. The light of the waxing moon is going to always be on the right. So when you're looking at the moon, if the light is on the right, we are in the waxing period. And if you need just a little helper for, think of the Karate Kid, wax on. We're waxing on the light. Okay. So that's just a really interesting way to understand where we are. You will obviously be able to identify where the new moon and the full moon are. So let me show you how to do this in your charts as well. So we have two charts here we're going to evaluate. So the first one, when you're doing this on your own chart, you always want to start at the sun. So find the sun, because the point where the sun and the moon meet on your chart would be the new moon. Then you are going to move clockwise from where the sun is. And you are going to move through the new moon, the waxing crescent, the first quarter, the waxing gibbous, all the way to where it would be in opposition up at the top of the chart here. So this would be, 19 degrees Aries is where the full moon would be. So we can see that this moon right here is the phase before the full moon. What is the phase before the full moon? It's the waxing gibbous. Same thing over here. Sun is here. We're moving clockwise. Well, we know that the opposition is over here, and this is the full moon. So this is past the full moon. This is all the way up here, and this is right near what we would call the third quarter. There are two schools of thought on how to approach this, by degree and by area. And we're going to go over what each of those means. So what I want you to do is just look at your chart, find the sun, and then trace your way around until you find your moon going clockwise and see what phase of the moon it is in. Again, we would have the new moon. We'd have the waxing crescent around here. We'd have the first quarter around here. We'd have the waxing gibbous over here. We'd have the full moon up here. Then the moon starts to lose and move into the new moon. We'd have the waning gibbous. We have the third quarter. We have the waning crescent. And then we finally have the new moon. So just moving around in the chart will give you a general idea of where it is. So what does this mean? So for somebody that is born, it's called whatever your natal lunar phase is. While the sign that it is in and the house it is in will define, kind of the costume it's wearing and the setting in which it occurs, the phase really tells you the modality in which and the method in which the moon will operate. Because again, as Druids, we consider those celestial currents coming down from above, those telluric currents coming up from below, meeting in the middle and harmonizing in the lunar current. This is an important part of who we are, and it really helps us think about how we fit into a sense of protection and a sense of, belonging within the world and feeling nourished, feeling loved, feeling emotionally stable, having a healthy subconscious, having a healthy dream life. So the new moon, if you're born under a new moon, it's very instinctive. It's very fresh. It's self-directed energy. It's driven by an inner impulse rather than external feedback. There's a strong sense of wanting new beginnings emotionally, but it can struggle with self-awareness at times because it's really just kind of operating the way that it wants to operate. Then we have the waxing crescent. This is the striving moon. This is the moon that is aspirational. It pushes through resistance. It's a strong personal desire to build and establish. It can be stubborn, though. It's driven by a personal vision that people may not others see yet because it is really just really the fighter. Um, then we get to the first quarter. This is about doing. It's action oriented. And keep in mind, this would be the square. Um, it thrives under pressure. It's built for challenges and forward momentum. It can be a bit impulsive because it's really on defense, but it learns through doing rather than reflecting. This is a moon that really, it's not going to be taking the deep dive as much as it is trying to change the actions and the surroundings to bring itself back into balance. Then we have the waxing gibbous. It's about refining. It's analytical. It's perfection seeking. It's driven to improve and develop, never quite satisfied with whatever is good enough. It can be a strong self-critic, and it works best when given a clear purpose to perfect. And then we have the full moon. This is aware. Now, keep in mind what we talked about. It's what a full moon is the earth is in between the moon and the sun. The moon is receiving the light of the sun and then reflecting it back on us. There is a sense of awareness there and balance. It's heightened, it's relational, it's about emotional vividness. It's very potent. And there is a tension between the inner world and the outer world, just as there is a tension between the inner world of the moon and the outer world of the sun and the earth in which we are in between. They're intensely aware of others, and their relationships are central to self-understanding. Okay. And then we have the waning gibbous. That is the sharing moon. That's a natural teacher. It's a communicator. It's a sharer of wisdom. And it's driven to spread ideas and lived experience outward. It can struggle with letting go of beliefs that no longer serve them, though. They tend to, they know what they know and they want to stick to it and they want to share it with others. Then we get to the third quarter, which is also a square. It's the questioning moon. It's reorients. It also has to take an action, but in a different way. It's more questioning. It's inner driven. It feels a tension between the past and the present, and often ahead of their time. And they can really feel out of step with the mainstream. And then finally, we have the waning crescent, which is also called balsamic moon. This is the people that really live in liminal space. It's an introspective moon. It can be prophetic. It's releasing. It has old soul energy. It's drawn to endings, closure, and karmic connections. It tends to need solitude because it lives really between those two worlds. So by identifying on your chart what area and what moon phase you're in, and then looking here, you can really add another facet to your understanding of how the lunar currents work within your life.